We're ready to begin. We wanted to wait just a few moments so other people could join us. So welcome again. My name is Terry Ryan. I'm the Snohomish County Aerospace Economic Development Director. I will be serving as the event facilitator. I'm going to review a few logistics, and then we will hear from the project team before ending with some time for questions and answers. There are a few things to keep in mind that will make your experience easier using the Zoom webinar platform. Participants are automatically muted. Throughout the event, if you have questions for the project team, please type them into the Q&A chat box. If you would like to see English captions, you can click on the CC button. There is live Spanish interpretation available during this meeting. This means we'll be presenting a little slower than you might be used to, leaving time for interpretation. If you wish to participate in Spanish, you can click on the interpretation button on your control panel and select Spanish as the language you want to hear. We are recording this webinar to add to our online open house so that those who are not able to join us today are still able to view the presentation. The recording that will be posted on the online open house will include the presentation only, not the Q&A or public comments. We will begin recording now. And with that, I'll introduce our presenters. We are joined today by Michael Tuberty, Vice President at Landerman Brown, Cody Meyer, Managing Consultant, Landerman Brown. They are part of the team working on updating the Paine Field Master Plan. They will walk us through what a master plan is, the plan background as it relates to Paine Field, what has been happening up until now, and what comes next for Paine Field Master Plan. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mike and Cody.
Thank you, Terry. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in this second in a series of public open house meetings for the Paine Field Master Plan. As Terry mentioned, I'm joined here today with a couple of my colleagues, obviously, in addition to the Paine Field Airport, Snohomish County staff. So joining me today is Cody Meyer, as Terry mentioned, and also Berta Fernandez. So we'll be happy to answer questions at the conclusion of our presentation as well. So if you could, Connie, switch, thank you. So where are we and what is a master plan? So, part of the importance of a master plan is that it is a long range, typically a 20-year planning document that recommends a strategy for development of the airport lands and the facilities at the airport. So this is both a long range document with snapshots in time at the short, medium, and long term, and identifying those particular projects that will need to be implemented over that duration of time. So as you may recall, we're updating this plan from the one that was adopted back in December of 2002 by the Snohomish County Council. So it's been a long time since an updated master plan has occurred. So also, as you may recall, at our last meeting, we outlined and discussed the existing airport facilities and some of the issues associated with those facilities. We presented the traffic forecasts, and then we discussed the process by which we were going to move forward. So with respect to the traffic forecasts, we submitted and presented those to you. We've also submitted those and had feedback by the county, as well as feedback and approval of those forecasts by the FAA. Next slide. So one of the key things that we wanted to discuss today is to talk about the facility requirements at the airport. The facility requirements are a key component in understanding what the future need is going to be, and then to identify any shortcomings of those needs, and then therefore plan accordingly over the short, medium, and long term plans going forward. So what's before you now is a summary of those facility requirements. And so just for clarity of definition, you'll see a couple of terms that require a little bit of clarity for you. So the word PAL 1, PAL 2, PAL 3 refers to planning activity level. And the MAP term is million annual passengers. And the word ops is operations. So the first one refers to the number of passengers that are running through the airport, individuals. The operations refers to the total number of annual aircraft that use the runways. So we have identified a number of triggers. And on the horizontal or on the vertical side, you'll see the other components, primary components of the airport that we looked at. And we look at the airport as a system, as a system of various items. So we're talking runways and associated taxiways. We're talking about the terminal, and the terminal refers to both the passenger terminal as well as the aircraft parking positions associated with the terminal. We're referring to the landside area, which is the access road into the airport, onto the airport. And we're also referring to parking associated with that and the various curbside coming to the terminal area as well. GA is general aviation facilities. And then there is a myriad support and cargo facilities that we'll talk about. So those are the definitions. Just wanted to make those understood to all on the call. And so what we see is that over the duration of the 20-year time frame of this master plan, we do not anticipate a need for any additional runways. So there's 2 runways and they will be sufficient through the planning period. Having said that, the other major components of the airport, terminal, landside, GA, support, and cargo run into issues when we get to what we call the planning activity level 2, or roughly 1.5 million passengers, and when aircraft operations approach 155,000 annual operations. At that point, and it's not always a hard and fast number, but at that point, there is going to need to be a trigger for additional development. So that's by way of summary of the capacity and the requirements. Next slide, please. So I wanted to mention as well, so while we looked at each of the components of the airport as well, I wanted to highlight the issue of the terminal. And as most of you know, while the airport owns the property associated with the passenger terminal, the actual terminal itself is undertaken and developed, operated by Propeller. So one of the things that we did take a look at is understanding the capacity of the terminal. And so what we have said is, in time, there will be a point at which the actual capacity of that terminal will be exceeded by the traffic throughout the planning period. So we've said roughly somewhere in the 1.5 million range of passengers is the point at which capacity of the terminal will need to occur. And so we talk about not only the terminal, but we're also talking about the access road. We're talking about additional aircraft parking positions. And then we're also talking about automobile parking positions as well. So next slide, please.
Moving on to Airfield. This is kind of the first other category we're going to touch on. As Mike mentioned, we don't anticipate during the planning period, which is our 20-year plan period, any runway expansions or additional runways. So when we look at the airfield, we're specifically talking about all the other routes that the aircraft is going to move to travel from terminal or from hangars to the runways for takeoff or landing. What you're looking at is kind of a range of areas that we've identified as non-standard. Now, since the last Paine Field Master Plan, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has upgraded their design standards to improve the safety of aircraft, moving from hangar to runway and a lot of different areas to improve safety for both aircraft and the passengers on the aircraft. So the circles identify the areas that can be upgraded to improve the safety. That's kind of the biggest theme for the Airfield program that we see in the master plan, is improving the safety of the aircraft movements. The other one is tied to capacity, and we'll touch on that one next. On this graphic, you can see the existing pavement is in gray. Proposed taxiway improvements, and specifically we're looking at the west runway here, the longer instrument runway. The proposed taxiways are shown in blue. As mentioned in the previous slide, these modifications are designed to come into compliance with FAA standards, as well as taking the opportunity to improve or optimize movements and capacity. The 4 angled taxiways you kind of see here are known as high-speed exit taxiways. These are designed to accommodate the future commercial fleet and maximize efficiency on the long runway, as well as looking at alternatives to maintain the use of GA on the west runway as well, and improving safety and capacity and overall pilot awareness.
So just by way of summary, before we get too far into what we're calling a variety of alternatives for the terminal and for the support facilities, GA, et cetera, I just want to again emphasize that other than the issues around the airfield, there's no requirement for additional runways. And so on the airfield, those items that Cody just mentioned are about fundamentally improving operational efficiency over the long term and improving to a degree the capacity of the airfield. So if we turn now, and it's important to note that when we start to think about alternatives, and I'll start with the terminal alternatives, the idea here isn't that we come up with a design solution or a comparison necessarily of design solutions for terminal alternatives. This is more a function of understanding the land areas needed for any potential future terminal area. And the reason, of course, as a reminder to everybody, is that this is the county, while the county owns the property, again, there's Propeller, who is the developer, and they will be deciding on the extent and the orientation and the design and the configuration of the terminal. What's important for the county is to make sure that there is adequate land available for that future expansion so that it does meet the 2040 demand, as well as ensuring that the configuration on the airfield, specifically the taxiways, is optimized. So the exercise we entered into was understanding the implications around what possible configurations Propeller might undertake. So these are more about understanding that rather than coming up with a detailed design. And these, there's a number of ways, I guess, to skin the cat. We've come up with a number of alternatives. On the left-hand side, you'll see the red is an extension of the existing terminal. And so it's between the existing terminal and the air traffic control tower with 11 gates. contact stands, as we call them, with 4 remote stands and dual taxi lanes behind it. On the right-hand side, it's a variation on a theme. So it's a bit of a dog leg to the north as well. And again, the exercise is fundamentally about understanding the land area required in the event that Propeller exercises its interest to expand the terminal. So this isn't intended, in a sense, to be a detailed design, but rather that configuration. So next slide, please. One of the things that's important as well, and we've put this in this particular location related to the terminal, but it's applicable in a lot of the other areas of the alternatives that we've come up with, is to prepare a list of evaluation criteria. And again, the idea here is that it is preliminary. So all of the alternatives we're presenting are preliminary. There's been no decisions made on any of these. These are for consideration by everybody and input by everybody. So we're seeking, your collective inputs on all of that. So as we go through these alternatives, we've prepared a list of criteria. As I said, it's not meant to be complete, nor is it exhaustive. But as we see it, there's a number of things that are important. The first of which is to ensure that they all meet the forecast demand through to the end of the 2040 timeframe. So we have not developed alternatives that are in any way piecemeal. They're shown in a manner that satisfies the 2040 timeframe. So they must all meet the forecast demand in all components of the airport. We want to make sure that all of these alternatives have the ability to properly expand, that particularly in the terminal, that the airfield circulation is efficient, that it meets all of the FAA regulations and standards in a manner that's both safe, efficient, and maintains and addresses capacity issues. And in the case of the terminal as well, that there's adequate parking, automobile parking, there's adequate lanes from Airport Road into access into the 100th and then the curb front as well. And then ideally, obviously, any expansion is best suited so that it doesn't disrupt any of the existing facilities or airport operations. Also, to ensure, and again, the environmental issues, and we can talk a little bit at length about that later, as well as the actual capital costs of each one of these projects. So we believe those are an important list of evaluation criteria on all of these alternatives that we've presented to you for your consideration. Next slide.
So as Mike mentioned, we examined the terminal area and the possible expansion scenarios. And the next item we're going to talk about is ground transportation. So that is talking about the 100th Street and Airport Road intersection, the terminal loop road into the curbside, and if and when in the future that the terminal is expanded, the ground transportation becomes a very, very important part of the long-range plan. So our plan will improve the capacity and efficiency of the road and transit systems that serve the airport. We're looking at doing this by examining the passenger demand and regional transit system expansions and improvements to different signalized intersections. We're also improving multimodal access. Right now, users can get to Paine Field via single occupancy vehicles, different rideshare programs or vehicles, bicycle, public transportation via bus, or even on foot. We're also planning potential locations for light rail and even urban air transport.
So far you've heard a little bit about the airfield. You've heard about the terminal and potential areas of growth for the terminal area. You've heard about the access road at the intersection of Airport Road and 100th, as well as the curb front part of the terminal. What we'll also need to talk about is the myriad of support facilities at this airport, and frankly, most that are needed to maintain the safe and efficient operation of the airport in totality. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that. At this airport, clearly there's a number of support facilities. And so some of them that I wanted to touch on are airport maintenance, airport administration facilities, the firefighting facilities that we call our facilities, an opportunity for some new support facilities like flight catering. As the airlines grow, there's going to be a need to enhance their operations, ground service equipment, and then also aircraft maintenance. And then there are a few others technology related that we wanted to talk about: urban air mobility or advanced air mobility. And then also where and how general aviation, corporate aviation could potentially grow at the airport, all of which are equally important. And they are part of the system of facilities at this airport that we have to think about and figure out how these things are all going to grow in a logical manner that maintains the integrity of the growth of the airport. So here, there's a number of facilities that are worth pointing out. And for all as well, this will be at this should be posted on the master plan. So for any of those that might have some difficulty seeing this right now, we've got a variety of facilities that are located in different places. And I'll start up on the top is I'll defer to general aviation because I've got a separate discussion on them, but we're locating possibilities of different flight catering facilities that will support commercial operations. So those typically want to be close to the terminal. While we've spent a fair bit of time talking to the maintenance facilities, ATS, et cetera, we've provided an area of expansion of their existing facilities as a potential opportunity in the event in the future that they need additional facilities as well. So that's called future MRO, land reserve. And then we've got airport maintenance, and there's a number of possibilities there as well. And additional expansion of fuel farm. And then I had mentioned urban air mobility. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got some possibilities of locations that are considered. And then on the west side of the primary runway, we're proposing an expansion to the FedEx facility further south. We recognize that there are a number of environmental issues. So at this point, what we're thinking is an expansion of land preliminarily without any consideration right now of development. We can talk a little bit about that later. So these are for consideration. They're posted on this consolidated drawing. Next slide. So in a little bit more detail, I thought it was worth noting and highlighting the importance of general aviation at the airport. So the light green that you're looking at are the existing facilities, and the dark green are proposed areas. And so the idea here is to consider, and so this would represent kind of ultimately land set-asides, if you will, for future opportunities for general and corporate aviation. It's not phased, so it's not suggesting that this would all occur at the exact same time. What you're looking at here would be the possibility of what general aviation's land set-asides might look like by the end of the planning period. And it's more a function of the land use. And so the dark green is proposed future development. We recognize that general aviation uses both runways. We also recognize that general aviation primarily uses the smaller runway. So we've consolidated the majority of land for general aviation around that, but that does not preclude GA, general aviation, from also using the primary runway. The yellow area is set aside for, in a sense, potentially corporate aviation, the larger jet aircraft, and that has been consolidated around the primary runway as well. Next slide. So what I wanted to show, this is a consolidated draft development of the airfield components that you heard from Cody, as well as the terminal, which is in the red, and then all of the other support facilities as well. It's important to note that this is draft. This is for consideration. We're seeking your input. And it also isn't suggesting that this is a development plan that would meet the demand requirements and beyond, in some instances, of the 20-year forecast. The one component that might stand out a little bit unusually is the light green, which is aerospace commercial development area as a land use. In the prior plan 20 years ago, it was just considered undeveloped. Since FedEx has now developed just on the north part of that facility, it's an opportunity for potential expansion. But again, we recognize there are some major environmental issues associated with that. So this isn't to suggest that this is the development that will occur. It's merely a set aside of property for what could possibly occur, recognizing a number of the issues. Some of the criteria that I mentioned earlier could affect some or a lot of that potential area from being developed. But being prudent, we wanted to establish the entire envelope of potential opportunity for that development. And again, this is all draft. Next slide. I thought it was worth also including at least some discussion here about the variety of technologies that are occurring in aviation. There's an awful lot of them in air traffic control. There's certainly a lot of them in the processing efficiencies, improvements of passenger terminals, but we're also seeing a significant uptick in what's called urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, drone activity. And while the technology is in its infancy and there's an awful lot of work that needs to go into developing that technology, as well as the regulatory framework around that, we thought it was prudent to at least set aside land in the potential eventuality that that does come into existence, and where might it best be served to meet the needs of the customers that will end up using that type of facility. So I wanted to make you aware of that. These aren't necessarily considering that there's going to be 3 sites, but we've identified the possibility of 3. Perhaps there's 1 in a sense. So we've started to think about the logic around where those particular sites might be. So that's also an area that we wanted to put forward to you. Next slide. So before we conclude our presentation, I just wanted to summarize for you where we are in this process. A number of you were on our first in a series of open houses back in November. This is the second, it's June, and we propose to have another public open house at the 4th quarter, actually, of this year. And then subsequent to that, there's a fair bit of work in terms of completing the details of this. So it would likely ultimately fold into the 1st quarter of 2023. So the star represents where we are. No decisions have been made. This is a presentation to you of what we are thinking about. So next slide, please. And so what we really want to, get from you is you have the opportunity through the open house process, as well as this evening, the webinar, but you'll also have the opportunity subsequent to this to please provide your input, good comments. Subsequent to that, we plan on finalizing alternatives and ultimately trying to cost projects associated with those alternatives, and then prepare a development plan. So the development plan will include both the projects themselves, the timing of those projects, the cost of those projects, and we will also look at the affordability of those projects. So we will look at whether or not the timing of those works with the cost of those projects as well. So we really appreciate your time in sitting and listening to this. We seek your comments now, but you also have the opportunity to provide comments via the comment blocks in the open house. So with that, Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. And I want to thank both of our presenters, Mike and Cody. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for participating with us tonight. I want to thank the presenters as well. Again, and Berta, I don't think you were introduced earlier, but Berta Fernandez is part of the Landerman Brown team. So Berta, thank you for participating. And we will make sure that we get all these questions answered, and we'll get those posted online. And to learn more about the master plan, make sure you visit painefieldmasterplan.com. That's all the time we have today. Thank you again for joining us. Good night.